true. Todd, welcome to the Vetathon, our man of the hour. It's good to see you. We've had two incredible hours. Stu Ritchell, first hour, I said he knocked it out of the park with his Vietnam Through My Lens. We got to hear pieces from that. Him and I chatted very intimately about just bearing your soul on stage. It was a great hour. FedEx just completed a really wonderful hour with two incredible post 9/11 vets. And we were just going over sort of the schedule coming up in the next couple hours. And confirmed, we have a 107-year-old, the oldest living British veteran, joining us in the 2 o'clock hour.
Correct.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
Debbie, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Debbie, I believe, sent you, Todd, a PowerPoint that
She
you should
did.
be able to pull up. Excellent. Debbie, we'll get to you in just a few minutes. For those of you who are joining us and maybe joining us for the first time, we are the VBC, Veterans Breakfast Club. Our mission is creating communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. This is our third annual Vetathon. We started it by doing a 12 to 12, 24 hours of veteran stories. We learned our lesson. And we started last year doing it 11 to 11 on the 11th day of the 11th month. And Brad, you're like Madonna. You keep switching hats on me.
Yeah, I am trying to change a hat every hour just to keep it going and keep you guessing about what hat's going to go on next.
Keep us fresh, keep us on our toes. Love it. Throughout the day, we're going to have stories from veterans of all eras, all branches. Please join us. Click into the Zoom room whenever you like. We're live on Facebook. We're live on YouTube. You can join in for an hour. You can join in for 20 minutes, however you like to join. Just come on and celebrate some of Veterans Day with us. Celebrate some of your, post-Marine Corps veteran birthday with us. But Todd, you're taking it off for the 1 o'clock hour. I'll see you in a couple hours. Take it away, sir.
All right. Have some good liberty there, Sean. Thank you very much for hosting the first 2 hours. It's my pleasure and honor to be here on Veterans Day. Veterans Day greetings to everybody. This hour, we have the remarkable story presented by Debbie Stuber about her parents. A love story, in a sense. Oh, boy, let me see here. I need to be able to share.
Can you enable the sharing of my screen? Is that all right?
I got you both covered.
Oh, thank you, because I was not enabled either, Debbie. So Sean, here. And Sean, before you do leave, after you enable us, could you also make sure that the live stream is going?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Co-host duty, and Debbie, I'll make you co-host as well. There we are.
Very good. Thank you. I got it. And this
live stream is up.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much. And Debbie's going to share with us the story of her parents, Kurt Leuchter and Edith Leuchter, Holocaust survivors. Kurt, I know, was also in the resistance, the French resistance. And Debbie, you are, as a survivor of this generation, the survivor generation, you feel a obligation, I suppose, to share this story, to share a history. It won't be long where we have no Holocaust survivors left, and it'll be up to people like you and me and others, everybody here, to be witnesses to that history.
That's correct. Pardon me, my father, who's 94, is having a little bit of difficulty signing on, but he doesn't actually need to be on until after I've presented. I just want to check one thing with you, Todd. I think it's okay. So my father is obviously the veteran of 2 wars, but the story I share is both of their stories. That's okay, yes?
Oh, yes, of course. Absolutely.
Okay. It's and will you be going to the next slide? Because I can share my own. Okay.
And Debbie, I was just going to say, which would you prefer? I have your slide deck up. I could share it easily and you could just tell me when to advance. Would that be easier for you?
You know what? That's okay. Well, you have it up. We'll just do it that way.
Sounds good.
Okay. Good afternoon. I just want to say thank you to all the veterans for their service. It's my honor and privilege to tell you my parents' story this afternoon. I want to especially thank the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh and Veterans Breakfast Club. The Holocaust Center continues to support me as well as my friends and family. I'm very blessed that my parents, who are both Holocaust survivors, are alive and well at 94 and 95. In November of 2018, shortly after the Tree of Life massacre here in Pittsburgh, my sister spoke at a vigil in Brooklyn, New York. And in part of her speech, she mentioned that when she and I were girls, my father would always say, you know, the Holocaust could happen again, and you better have your passports ready to go to Israel. As time goes by, as Todd mentioned, the voices and eyewitnesses of the Holocaust are dwindling. The Anti-Defamation League, a leading anti-hate organization in the United States, determined that in 2022, there were 3,697 anti-Semitic incidents. This is a 36% increase from the 2,717 incidents in 2021, and is the highest number on record since the organization began tracking these incidents since 1979. 2022 was also the third time in the past 5 years that the year in total has been the highest on record. As we all know, anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred is ever prevalent in our society. In the last several weeks, anti-Semitic incidents have spiked by over 400%. However, anti-Semitism didn't begin in the 20th century. It's the oldest form of hatred and has affected the Jewish community for thousands of years. Sharing our family story is of the utmost importance. It's now my generation's responsibility and the next to carry their torch. After this afternoon, you will be witness to my family story, and I hope that you will impart what you hear from others. With others, excuse me. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. My mom, Edith Leuchter, was born in Bruchsal, Germany on December 31st, 1927. Her father owned Max Loeb grocery store, named after him, and he sold canned goods and produce, butcher supplies, and tools. The family lived above the grocery store. In July of 1938, Max made the difficult decision to emigrate to the United States, as he could tell that the future for him and his family was bleak. The plan was to send for his wife and children, but unfortunately, that never happened. Next slide. When my grandfather Max arrived in New York, he sent this telegram to his wife Julia and his children Edith and Heinz. Pictured here is that telegram with the swastika emblem stamped on the envelope. Next slide, please. Pictured here is my mother's family, my grandparents. There's the grocery store above which they lived, and my mother and her younger brother Heinz. Next slide, please. On Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, November 9th, 1938, my mom Edith was awakened in the wee hours of the morning. She could hear sirens and breaking glass and could even see flames outside of her window, at which point she crawled into bed with her mother, Julia, to seek comfort. Until my recent trip to my mother's hometown, when I stood in front of the home my mother lived in as a child, I didn't realize that the flames she saw were coming from her own synagogue, which was just steps from her house. My grandmother, Julia, said it was no longer safe to stay in their home, so they moved to Matilda Weil's house, Edith's grandmother, about 10 minutes away. Next slide. Soon after, Heinz, Edith's brother, was sent to a school in Frankfurt. Edith is bitter to this day about the fact that Heinz was sent away because she feels that if he wasn't, our family story could have turned out differently and he might have survived. The letter pictured here is from Heinz to his father Max in the United States, and a drawing we believe Heinz made of himself and his sister Edith. He must have missed her so. My family is fortunate enough to have many letters and drawings from my Uncle Heinz. Next slide. From that school, Heinz was, before that, thank you. From that school, Heinz was moved to an orphanage in Frankfurt and eventually deported to Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. A letter from Heinz to his aunt and uncle is pictured here. He ends the letter with 1,000 kisses, your loving Heinz. The letters in my mother's possession have actually been translated for us. In May 1944, he was deported to Auschwitz. He was placed in a specific area called the Theresian family camp. 17,517 people were deported from Theresienstadt to Auschwitz. As the Allies were beginning to learn about the Holocaust, This camp was created within Auschwitz to mislead the world about the final solution. Heinz was on a transport, excuse me, Heinz was on a transport of about 2,499 people. Upon arrival in Auschwitz, he was given a prisoner number, and I'm assuming tattooed, a number between A1445 and A2506. Of the 17,517 people who were deported from Theresienstadt, only 261 survived. Heinz was not one of them. He either died of starvation or disease or was murdered in the gas chambers. Go ahead, Todd. On October 12th, 1940, at least 6,500 Jews were deported from Bruchsal and surrounding areas in southwestern Germany. Edith, her mother Julia, and her grandmother Matilda were given 1 hour to gather a few possessions and were marched to the railroad station along with the other Jews in the town of Bruchsal, numbering about 120 people. I'm hoping we can share in a moment the footage that was just discovered a few years ago in Bruchsal, Germany archives. It was hidden, and a year ago, October, we met the gentleman who was responsible for having the footage made public, only after he told the local government officials that he would bring them to court if the footage wasn't made available. In February 2020, we discovered that my mother and her grandmother are in the footage. In this frame on the far right is my mom with the beret, and her mother is to the left of her, carrying a purse and a blanket. My family traveled last October to Bruchsal, Germany, as the local theater produced a play entitled The Girl with the Hat Box, based on my mother's story. We're hoping it comes to Pittsburgh for the premiere in the United States next year.
And this is your mother, and this is her hat box.
This is my mother. Yes.
And this is your grandmother.
Yes, and if you move the mouse over to the left, the old woman on the left, all the way on the left.
Oh, here
yes.
we go.
So my mother walked with her mother and her grandmother, and my mother never completely determined that that was her grandmother, but we're pretty sure because they walked with her that day. We're not sure why they didn't walk together, but I have a photo of my great grandmother, and it looks just like this woman.
It looks like her. Oh my God.
We're pretty sure it's her.
3 generations.
Yeah. And Todd, yeah.
And this is a still captured from
the footage that I'm hoping we share in a moment. Since you're sharing my screen, I don't know that you're going to have the ability to share the footage, but I do have it in a link that I can share with you in just a moment.
Well, let me see. Let's see. I just need to reshare and optimize for video. I assume that the next time here we go. I'll optimize for video, and then is it the next
it
slide?
Should be the next slide. Yeah.
Okay.
So when they arrived at the railroad station, Julia asked for permission to call her son Heinz in Frankfurt to see if he could join them. The police denied this request, but she was given approval to go home to look for the papers that she said she had to emigrate to the United States.
Oh.
She went back twice.
I'm sorry, Debbie. I'm going to interrupt you again just because it seems
Sure,
that
that's fine.
the footage is linked. It's not embedded in the slideshow. It's linked to a site, correct?
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to right now give you the link in the chat.
And I think I have it. I'm at the link now. Okay, so it's a YouTube video. Yeah, we'll be able to share this unless it's copyrighted. We might get dinged for that and taken off the air. But if it's not copyrighted, if it's public domain, then we should be able. So I'm going to share my screen again so we could share the footage if you don't mind.
Right. Sure. Let me just say a couple more things before you share that.
Okay. Got it.
I got to get back to the slide I was on. So on my screen.
Okay.
So just bear with me for a second. When they arrived at the railroad station, Julia asked for permission to call her son Heinz in Frankfurt to see if he could join them. We think that when she went back for the papers, they weren't there because they were probably taken at that point. From inside the railroad station, they could see outside the windows. Townspeople, including children, were yelling that they were happy to see the Jews leave Bruchsal and were spitting at them. Eventually, they boarded the train and they breathed a small sigh of relief because as they crossed the Rhine River, they realized they were traveling south toward France as opposed to east toward Poland. Okay, your turn.
All right, so I'm going to share this footage now. It's a YouTube video. It must be public domain. And we could, Debbie, I think you have shared the link here in the chat.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to try to get my father. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, he cannot see the email.
Okay, here it goes. And you could tell me how much you want to play this.
It's just 1 minute and 30 seconds. So if you're okay, you can share the
Sounds
whole
good.
thing. You can see the SS in the background. That's hopefully probably my great, and there they are.
There they are.
You probably can't imagine how difficult this must have been for my family to see my grandmother, who we never met, because she didn't survive. Thank you. You can go to the next slide, and I would like, I think there was a question that I would love to answer.
Oh, Mary Klepper asks, how did you find this video?
So we didn't find it. So later in the presentation, I'll talk about when we went to Germany in 2017, but basically it was in the archives. Oh, I thought I saw my father. Yes, my father finally joined us. Okay.
Excellent.
Welcome. I've been having a little bit of anxiety. Now I can calm down. Dad, you're on mute. So, but I'm still speaking, so you're okay on mute for now. So it was in the archives of Bruxelles, and a gentleman basically forced the government to release the footage and anything else that was hidden in the archives. So I hope that answers your question, Mary. Okay. A few days later, they arrived in Gurs, an internment camp in southwestern France. So that's the next slide. Yeah, there you go. I just wanted to pause here for a second and tell you all that an internment camp is not a concentration camp. There were many internment camps in many countries. They did not murder people in internment camps, but obviously people were ill and they died as well there. Edith had to use straw to make mattresses, and there were too few blankets for too many people. She described it was extremely disgusting and very muddy. She attended school but learned very little. In April 1941, Edith, her mother, and grandmother were deported to another camp called Rivesaltes in the area of Perpignan, still in the south of France. Last year, one of our friends in my mother's hometown presented us with a memorial book from the camp, as well as 2 stones he brought back with him, which was quite meaningful. My grandmother, Yulia, at this point developed a hernia and was ill. At this camp, the barracks were infested with insects, and according to my mom, the beds looked like cages for rabbits. One bright spot was that Max, Edith's father, was able to send packages and money from the United States. Edith was always hungry. She says the food consisted of watery soup with vegetables that looked like weeds. Her mother had to cut her hair off at one point because of proliferation of lice in the camp. The Vichy government of France gave the difficult choice to the parents in this camp to sign their children over to an organization called OSE, which from French translates to Children's Aid Society. This was a Jewish underground organization that operated throughout the war and saved over 5,000 Jewish children. Edith had to say goodbye to her mother, Yulia, and her grandmother, Matilda, but she couldn't hug her grandmother because Matilda had body lice at this point. A few months later, she received a telegram from her mother that she was deported to Drancy, another internment camp in Paris, and eventually deported to Auschwitz. We all hope that Julia didn't make it there and died of the hernia in the cattle car on the long trip there. However, we will never know. By the end of the war, Edith was in 5 schools and orphanages. While she was in one school, she was also a part-time nanny for a family from the area of Alsace-Lorraine, the geographic area between France and Germany. Edith was given the false French name Edith Labbé and papers that indicated she was from that area as well, which made sense because she was from Germany and was already learning French. Next slide, please. At one point, Edith was placed by the OSE in an orphanage called Magelier for about 1.5 years. She made a lot of friends there, and she also met a boy named Kurt, and he really liked her, but she thought he was a big shot and didn't pay much attention to him. Next slide, please. Toward the end of the war, Edith became a French Girl Scout, and upon liberation was able to get an affidavit from her father, Max, and emigrated to the United States. She reached the port of New York on a freighter called the Fort Royal on April 23rd, 1946. Next slide, please. This is an ad that my grandfather Max placed in a German Jewish newspaper post-war called the Aufbau, searching for his wife and son, my uncle and my grandmother, who, as I said earlier, did not survive. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, you're behind one. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I share the one before that. I share this mostly with children who don't necessarily know geography. So Kurt was born in Vienna, as you can see, and Edith was born in Bruxelles near Heidelberg. It's about 6.5, 7-hour drive, and they would never have met each other. Next slide. My father, Kurt Leuchter, was born in Vienna, Austria on February 6th, 1929. His father, Moritz, pictured here, owned a wholesale silk business. My father was an only child, and he and his parents vacationed each year, and they had a pretty good life until March 12th, 1938. This is the day when Germany annexed Austria, otherwise known as the Anschluss, and all the borders were closed. On Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, November 10th, 1938, Kurt was sent home early from school at about 9:30 in the morning. On his way home from school, he saw a synagogue burning, and the SS were shooting and dragging the men out of the synagogue, forcing them to throw the Torahs, our Jewish Bibles, into the Danube River. He hurried home. When he arrived there, the SS were arresting his father and 9 other Jewish men. Kurt sat on the steps crying and waited for his mother, Rosa, to return home from shopping. She knew it was too dangerous to stay, so they walked 3 blocks to Kurt's grandmother's house. On their way, 2 SS approached them. One grabbed Kurt and the other grabbed Rosa by the hair and threw them both down onto the street. A woman passerby tried to help them, but the SS threatened her with being sent to Dachau concentration camp. When they got to Kurt's grandmother's house, Kurt's cousin and his aunt were there as well. 10 days later, there was a knock at the door, and to their surprise, it was Moritz. He had been held in an armory, and the SS treated him badly and threatened to cut off his finger if he couldn't take off his wedding ring, which, thank goodness, he was finally able to do. Moritz was told by the Nazis that he had 3 months to get out of Austria. Next slide, please. Moritz was able to procure a visa via Genoa, Italy, and in February 1939, they arrived in Antwerp, Belgium. They had with them a few suitcases and a bit of jewelry that they had hidden in their clothing. Here in Antwerp, Kurt learned how to speak Flemish and French in school, and things were quiet for a while. Soon after arriving in Antwerp, my father was issued this passport, which has the swastika stamped on it, as well as the name Israel, which you can see above his name. Now, why is that? Well, the Nazis assigned the name Israel to all Jewish boys and Sarah to all Jewish girls, one of the many ways they ripped away people's identities. Next slide, please. In Antwerp, they ended up living very near a man who happened to be from the town of Brody, Poland, which also happened to be Moritz's, Kurt's father's hometown, as Moritz moved to Vienna when he was a little boy. One night, when Kurt was eavesdropping on his parents' conversation, he heard that the neighbor would let them hide a bit of jewelry in a washcloth in his basement wall. Next slide, please. On May 10th, 1940, the Germans invaded Belgium. Moritz, along with all the other Jewish men, were deported by the Belgians to the south of France. In July 1940, Rosa and Kurt were moved to a detention camp in Limburg, Belgium. My father's Aunt Paula, who looked Aryan, as she had blonde hair and blue eyes, approached the Gestapo to procure papers for them to move to Paris and was granted permission. They didn't stay long, as they wanted to be near Moritz, so they hired a guide to take them across the demarcation line. The sign pictured here is part of the permanent exhibit at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, which is currently located at Chatham University. I want to mention here that you can go see the exhibit at no charge. You just have to have tickets in advance. And until November 25th, there's also an exhibit, as some of you may know, at Posner Hall at Carnegie Mellon University called Violins of Hope, which has instruments displayed that were played by Jewish musicians and survived and restored after the Holocaust. They crossed the demarcation line at night with 14 other Jews. The SS were guarding the border with guard dogs and machine guns. Luckily, they crossed without incident, and at this point, they boarded a train for Marseille in the south of France. I just want to read the translation here, which is on your screen. Jews are forbidden to cross the line of demarcation to go to the occupied zone of France. Jews are those who belong to the Jewish religion or have more than 2 Jewish ancestors in their grandparents' generation. An individual's grandparents will be considered Jewish if they belong to the Jewish religion. Any violation of the present decree will be punishable by imprisonment or a fine and by the possible confiscation of property. Kurt and Rosa, as I said, were supposed to go to Marseille, but accidentally got off the train one stop before, which was extremely dangerous because they had no ID papers. Somehow, at 11 years old, my father, Kurt, had the wherewithal to push his mother through the train station. They registered with the Jewish agency and were put in a detention camp called Hotel Terminus. By this time, Moritz was in 3 different camps: Saint-Cyprien, Gers, which I mentioned earlier in my mother's story, but they were in different sections and never crossed paths, and lastly, Camp des Milles. The camp was about 30 miles from where he and his mother were. My father was able to bring food to his father on the weekends. Soon after, Rosa and Kurt were moved to this camp as well. All 3 were able to get a pass to go to the city of Marseille, and my father had his bar mitzvah there at a synagogue. Soon after, Kurt's parents were given that same difficult choice to turn their son, Kurt, over to OSE, and on August 9th, 1942, they signed the papers. Next slide, please. This is the last letter that Rosa and Moritz, my grandparents, wrote to my father, which he still has in his possession. Loosely translated, they plead with him to procure food for them and that he should take care of everything and to please make them proud. Months later, Kurt found out that Rosa and Moritz were both murdered in the gas chambers in Auschwitz. Next slide, please. Kurt was in place in Hotel Bompard, which was repurposed as a detention camp. The conditions were terrible, so he and some friends decided to escape one night when the French police were drunk. They were caught and were brought back there. The second time they escaped, they were more careful and went undetected. Next slide. Somehow they knew that there was a home sponsored by OSE called Majelier. There, my father was able to procure food from nearby farmers using a bicycle with a wagon. Here's where he met a young girl named Edith, who he liked, but as I mentioned before, the feeling was not reciprocated. Kurt and his friends were told they could go to the port of Marseille and board a ship for the United States. But at that point, the US had reached Africa and the German U-boats were bombing the armed forces. So he was sent back to the orphanage for a brief period of time. Next slide. In February 1943, Kurt was moved to a boys' delinquent home in a town called, Jolibois. The director of the home, Mademoiselle Burrell, knew he was Jewish, and she had a connection to the mayor of that town, and he was able to provide false papers to Kurt. His new name was now Claude Lambert. He, like my mother, was supposed to be from Alsace-Lorraine because he was from Austria, so he spoke German, and since he was in France, he was learning to speak French. In this home, he cooked and chopped wood and performed various other chores. Months later, somebody squealed that there was a Jewish boy hiding in the home, so the Nazis came looking for him. He was hiding in a closet for several hours, and luckily the Nazis did not open it. The director knew at this point, though, that Kurt could no longer stay there, and she made a connection for him to the Maquis, the French underground. And for the next year, Kurt lived in the woods and helped to blow up the last truck of German convoys and the rails that they passed. They received French, British, and American assistance. Upon liberation, he was sent to 2 more orphanages in France, one in Lyon and one in Paris. At one point, he went back to the neighbor in Antwerp, Belgium. Sure enough, the jewelry was still in the washcloth in the basement wall. He brought his father's gold pocket watch and his mother's bracelet and wedding ring to America, and he still has them. In Paris, he got a job making leather handbags, and in the evening attended a technical school. In August 1946, he boarded the French troop ship, the Athos II, and along with about 70 other orphans who he took care of on this journey, arrived in the port of New York on September 8th, 1946. Next slide, please. In January 1947, my father was standing outside the Museum of Modern Art on the sidewalk, chatting with his friends, when who should tap him on the shoulder but Edith, the girl he liked in Majolier, the orphanage in France. They embraced, and Edith must have seen something different in Kurt this time because they fell in love. And on August 13th, 1950, they were married, which also happens to be my eldest son's birthday. Interestingly enough, my mother worked for a haberdashery, a hat factory in the Empire State Building. And the play we attended in Germany last year is entitled Girl with the Hat Box. In January 1952, my father was drafted into the US Army and spent 9 months in Korea on the 38th parallel. Luckily, he made it home safe. Next slide, please. Eventually, my dad became an aerospace engineer for Grumman Aerospace without a high school or college degree. My father worked on the guidance navigation system of a couple of different Apollo missions, and his name, along with several other 100 engineers, is still on microfiche on the moon. Pictured here is Kurt Leuchter's signature that's diagonal and in bold, and our family has several copies of it hanging in our homes. Next slide, please. In 2011, my father was awarded the Legion of Honor Medal given to World War II veterans by the French government. When I read the letter that's not pictured here, that accompanied it, something just didn't make sense to me. I knew my father was a Holocaust survivor, a Korean war vet, and that his name was on the moon, but then realized for the first time that since he fought in the French resistance, he's also a World War II vet. Next slide, please. In 2017, my family was fortunate enough to travel to my mother's hometown, Bruchsal, Germany, and we had 5 Stolpersteine installed. Stolperstein means stumbling stone. This project was created by a non-Jewish German. I see his pictures upside down. Oh, well. There are 100,000 Stolperstein in 31 European countries, and it's considered the largest deconstructed Holocaust memorial in the world. So if you travel to Europe, please remember to look down on the sidewalk. So the stones are laid in front of the home, the last home that that person willingly wanted to live. And it basically just says when they were born, when they were deported, and what happened to them. So my mother and my grandfather who survived also have stones. Pictured here are 5 that we had installed for Yulia and Max Loeb, my maternal grandparents, for Heinz and Edith Loeb, my mother and uncle, and my maternal great-grandmother, Matilda Weil. Matilda Weil's prayer book from the 1880s somehow survived, and we were able to use this prayer book to recite the Jewish morning prayer during the ceremony. The townspeople of Bruchsal, Germany were absolutely wonderful in that they welcomed us with open arms and were extremely generous of heart. Several spent the day of the ceremony with our family, and there was even an assembly at the local middle school with presentations by students. One of the students who presented information about my family story, as there were other families honored that day as well, actually attended the play last October about my mother's life, which meant a great deal to us. Next slide, please. I grew up on Long Island, New York, in a loving but complicated home. My parents were understandably extremely overprotective. My first experience with anti-Semitism was in 1st grade, when my classmate called me a dirty Jew. In middle school, a boy set firecrackers in the stairwell as I left. And when I was 16 and home alone, the mailbox affixed to our house was blown up, and eggs were thrown at the house on an occasional basis. At my current job, many years ago, my former boss, who sat not too far away from me, was on the phone one day, and I overheard him saying to a customer, "Well, why don't you Jew him down?" And more recently, when I went to a local sandwich shop in my neighborhood and asked if they had black and white cookies, which is a cookie typically served in New York. And I mentioned to the young woman behind the counter that I had had them at my synagogue. She looked straight at me and said, "You don't look Jewish." In 2019, the brother of my classmate, who called me a dirty Jew in 1st grade, put a post on my high school Facebook group, nothing to do with what she had said, but I decided to add a comment mentioning what his sister had said to me back then, and he contacted his sister, and she wrote me this email. My adult self is not shocked to see that this, given what was said, my adult self is not shocked to see this, given what was said and taught in my house, but I am no less ashamed, horrified, and saddened, especially when I see how this has stuck with you and hurt you so badly. If it's any comfort, I am not the same person and do not advocate hate against anyone and don't tolerate it in my life. Maybe it's some comfort in knowing that I have not continued to hurt others like I hurt you. Thank you for being open to my message. It's great to hear that it had a positive effect, which it absolutely did. And now I get to add it to the story I tell as well. Next slide. My parents are 94 and 95, and this past August celebrated their 73rd wedding anniversary. Pictured here are my 2 biological sons, my sister and her 2 daughters. The little lady on the right is their first great-grandchild and my granddaughter, who was born a couple of years ago. My mother's last name is Loeb, which means strong man or lion. And my father's last name is Leuchter, which means candelabra. I'd like to think that the strength and many branches of my family that now exist give us all light and hope for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And your father is in the room with us.
Yes, he
here,
is.
right?
I'm not sure exactly where he was a little bit ago. Dad?
Jolene
Okay,
Jacques?
Dad, can you? No, that's his caregiver. Can you? Thank you. Can you unmute him?
I could ask him
okay,
if there he is.
There's Kurt Leuchter.
Hey, Kurt.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, okay. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's our honor. It's our pleasure and our honor. You must be so grateful to your daughter for knowing your story so well and your wife's story and sharing it with people.
Yes, she does a very good job, I know.
Thanks, Daddy.
It's a pleasure.
Can I ask you this, Kurt?
I rushed very fast to come here to that Zoom because I was a veteran affair right today. It's Veterans Day, and we had a big ceremony at the park.
That's right. I forget that you're right. An Army veteran, Korean War veteran, with a whole story, I'm sure, about that service too. But I wanted to ask you, when Debbie was growing up and your other children were growing up, how much did you tell them about what happened to you in World War II?
Well, I didn't tell them till I was in my 40s, 40, 45. I wouldn't say nothing before that. And then I figured I better tell them so they'll know exactly what happened to us. So I told them the whole story. I mean, I told them everything that happened to us.
Debbie,
He doesn't have all the details
right.
on that, but if you want to see my details, they're in the museum anyway.
Yeah, and I should encourage people to look your name up. If you Google Kurt Leuchter, you'll find a lot of information about his story.
I'd like to also add that I just put in the chat for people who would like to see my presentation. This was at the Shaler Area Library last fall. And my father also had a last chance testimony that's through USC Shoah Foundation as well. My mother has one too. And my parents shared bits and pieces, when we were younger. But as I grew up, we got it all straightened out in chronological order so that I could start speaking.
Wow. Did you have a hint, Debbie, of the trauma that lay behind your parents' lives and story when you were a child?
Yes, because, for example, unlike other children, they didn't want to let me go stay over somebody's house. They were really nervous that something would happen to me. So I definitely, I think not in the literal sense, but I feel like my father thought there was a Nazi around every corner. So something that could hurt me. Right.
Kurt, when you were in the Army in the 1950s, I've heard from other Jewish veterans that there was a lot of anti-Semitism in the Army, and of course in the country.
We did not.
Okay, good. Tell me about this.
We only had one person on the ship that was there. I think he was somehow from Germany or something, and he was bad, but nobody else. I mean, all the time we were in the Army, had no problem.
That is wonderful to hear.
Except for one sergeant.
Except for one sergeant.
Yeah.
Did going to Korea during the war, because you went in 1952? Is that when you went?
In 52, yes.
And so the war is still going on in 1952.
Yes,
and you were at the
it finishes while I was there in August of 53.
I guess what I want to ask is, was it hard to go back into war? I mean, you had escaped war by barely, survived war. Was it hard to go back into a combat situation?
I want to tell you something. They asked me when I got drafted, do you have any objection to join the American Army? I said, no. And why should I? I came to a country that was free, sort of, until today. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen here. But anyway, it was free, and I figured it's my duty to do something.
Wow.
I mean, I've seen plenty before. I was in the underground. By the way, this is my medal here.
Oh, look at that. The Legion of Honor.
Oh, Daddy, thank you for sharing.
From the French government.
Yes.
Yeah, I had my shirt on still when I came home from the uniform.
Oh, how wonderful. And we see also that you have the combat infantry badge up above that, indicating your combat in Korea.
Yes. I was in the combat engineers.
Oh my. What a remarkable story. Can you tell us a little bit about your work in the French underground, the Maquis? What did you do with them?
I'd rather not.
You'd rather not?
I'd rather not.
Why is that?
It's too dangerous, too many things.
Todd, I want to say that, so my parents have shared basically their entire story, but that's the one part that my father will not discuss.
Do you know why? Generally, why?
I pretty much know why. Yeah, I do, but I'm not going to share that either, if you don't mind.
Okay, absolutely.
It was very difficult for him, and he basically had to do what he had to do, and let's leave it at that.
Got it. Oh, I would get the picture.
Thanks.
Can I ask you about the story of the OSE is new to me.
Okay.
And you went through it somewhat quickly, and I was surprised to hear that it was there was an official connection with the Vichy government.
No. Let me explain something. The organization came from 1932 from Russia, helping kids there and everything. And they are formed in France, the same organization for French, and not only Jewish children, any children. But when the war broke out and they saw what happened to Jewish children, to all children, they were very enthusiastic to help. And some of them gave their life, I want you to know. Some of them were deported by doing what they did. It was very hard for them to do it. But I must say, they did a fantastic job, because they tried to hide us with French people. And they saved 5,000 kids.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I know. And they were good French people.
Right.
Because I was with a woman, she was very nice. She was running a bad boys sort of situation. Yeah. And the lady that hid me there, took me there. She knew that person somehow. I don't know how, but they got along pretty well. She was in the lady that hit me. She was in her late 50s, middle 50s, late 50s, and she was absolutely a wonderful person to me. She did everything she could for me until somebody, I don't know, whoever squealed, and then the Gestapo came looking for me, and she hid me in the basement. Lucky she talked the guy out of it. Otherwise I wouldn't be here today.
My father tried to find Mademoiselle Burel after the war, but he was never able to do so, which he really regrets.
And where is it that you escaped? You said with a friend.
No, that was when we first came out of the camp. My parents let me go. We went out of the camp. They signed me over to this organization, the OSE. What happened is they put us first in a hotel, the Vichy government, in a hotel, like a holding station, holding camp. Then we found out that one of the Vichy guys wanted to deport us because he said, we don't want the kids here. Why should we keep the kids? The parents were deported, but we don't want to have the kids around. So when I heard that, and I knew the Vichy police, there was a lot of drinking. So one night that they were sleeping, we took off the window. 3 of us. And
you got caught the first time, right?
Yeah, we got caught near the station. We made a mistake somehow. We went the wrong entrance. We went the wrong way. But we learned quick.
And then you escaped again.
No, I didn't know
Okay.
one.
Maybe I misheard.
Yeah, no, yes, Dad. Yeah.
Huh?
You the first time the police were drunk, you went back to the orphanage and then you escaped again.
Yeah, then I went again, but they didn't see it. They didn't catch us. That's what happened.
Okay. And the whole time you're going under a different name, an assumed name.
Yeah, I was Claude Lambert. I remember that, and I spoke French pretty good. and where I was born was right at the border where they had an accent.
Where
And
he was
the
born.
town where I was born was all bombed out, so they got no records.
Oh man.
The guy
The town
knew.
that you were supposedly
mayor.
born.
The mayor was a friend of that woman, and he knew all the stuff. So they made it out for me, made the card out for me, the ID card.
Boy, what a story. And have you, I know that you've shared your story with your daughter and she has shared it quite a bit. Have you written your story down?
Yeah,
Okay.
The story is in by what's his name in Los Angeles by
Shoah.
Shoah Foundation.
Right.
And some details, but not all, are at USHMM, United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. We have we also have a videotape from the local Holocaust Center. And as I mentioned before, my presentation has been recorded a few times, and one of the presentation links is in the chat, but I have others as well. I speak to libraries and schools and churches. So I'll be honest with you, if you don't mind me asking here, if anybody wants me to speak around Pittsburgh, I'm sure that Todd can give you my information, and I'll be happy to do so. I'm speaking 10 times between now and January.
That's wonderful. Yes. And I'll just reiterate, if you would like Debbie to come and give this presentation to your organization or your group, you could let me know. Please do feel free to put your contact information, Debbie, here in the chat.
Okay, I'm doing it now.
All right. And,
she's okay in my book.
What did you say, Dad?
What?
Oh, nothing. It's okay.
You're okay in my book.
Oh, you're okay in my book too, Daddy. I do want to mention also. So since March of 2020, I've spoken about it 30 times, and I have to say that every single time my parents joined me virtually.
Oh, wonderful.
You know, I never thought I'd make it to 95.
You're not quite 95, Dad.
94.
Well,
I hear my mother in the background.
Considering what you both went through, especially you, Kurt, with 2 wars, it is amazing that you're here at almost 95.
Let me tell you something. You always have to look at the bright side. There's a light in the tunnel.
Oh.
I'm going to make it to the other side. That's where the light is. And that's what you have to think. Otherwise, you can't survive. Also, I keep telling kids, you know what I tell children? I tell them that if you open up a book and you look at the book, and not only a book, the newspapers, television, look at different newspapers, look at different stations on TV. And then when you saw everything, you make up your own mind. Don't let anybody tell you what to think, what's right, what's wrong. You decide.
So that's a message that you have for young people. Think for yourself. Look on the bright side. Believe in the future and believe in hope, I suppose. Is that what got you through?
Yeah, I guess it must have. Yeah. It must have. And you believe in God too, because at one time I didn't, after my parents were killed and everything else. But then when I was in the foxhole, one guy yelled out, "Oh my God." I said, "Oh, maybe I should do that." I'm not kidding you. So, it's possible. Who knows?
I didn't know that part of the story. Usually when during Q&A, there's something that comes out that I haven't hered before. It's fabulous.
I love that. So in a foxhole, I mean, the old saying is there are no atheists in foxholes. And there you are in a foxhole, and you thought, maybe that was the time to be a believer, huh?
What do you
got to lose?
The guy was yelling out, so I said, maybe that's it. Maybe I should.
Oh, is that great? What a wonderful.
One time I didn't, and after a while, when my parents got taken away and everything else, I said, where is he?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when this guy yelled out, oh my God, I said, oh my, maybe he's right. Maybe I should think about it.
And wasn't it Elie Wiesel who said something like, he never stopped believing in God, but he definitely stopped liking God?
I know personally. I know Elie. I know.
Did you really?
He said, yeah, he came down to our meetings here in Miami. I mean, many years ago, he came down. And I know him from France anyway.
Boy, oh
He's
boy.
he's an amazing person. What he went through, unbelievable. I know. I seen the I seen the bunk where he lived, where he was in camp, because I went back to the camp to say a prayer for my parents.
Oh,
Yeah, my parents went to Auschwitz. I've never been, and I think they were hoping for some
Let me
kind of
tell you.
closure, but
Let me tell you, people from the bus, they were in the bus with me, all asked me, how did you manage to with your parents? How did you? Well, so it bothered me for a long time. I never got over it. Because when you're 13 and a half years old, you lose your parents and you're all on your own. It's very hard. It's not easy. You have to do everything yourself. You have nobody to ask, really, you know. It's not easy. Kids here don't know what that means. They don't know. They're not how shall I say? We were grown up in Europe, most of us, and we were already half men when we got over 14. But here, the kids are kids. What can I tell you? That's the story.
it's just,
thanks, Dad.
it's
By the way,
overwhelming.
I never knew you couldn't call me Kurt. What's your name?
Todd.
Tom?
Todd
Todd.
with a D. Todd with a
All
D,
right,
Dad.
Tom. You call me Kurt.
So,
Kurt.
Dad, just to refresh your memory, because we do these a lot. This is a local veterans group in Pittsburgh, Dad.
What's that?
A local
wanted-
veterans group in Pittsburgh.
Wait, Mom.
This is a local veterans group in Pittsburgh who we're speaking to.
Okay. Oh,
Okay.
very good.
It's just such an honor, I mean, I think I don't have the words to tell you how meaningful it is to have you just talk with us a little bit here on Veterans Day, Kurt. It's beyond an honor. It's overwhelming. Somebody put it here in the chat. I think Mary Klepper, your story and your Edith's story is so beautiful, so tragic, so overwhelming that it's hard to find the words to respond to it.
I tell you, I tried to do my best, whatever I can. Yeah, when I came to America, but I see things are not looking good too good. They don't look too good for Jewish people.
And you know, Kurt, yeah, you said I mean, Debbie shared that story about when she was little and you said, hey, it could happen again. The Holocaust could happen
I
again.
warned the kids. I told the children that. I told them, I think when I was 40, I told them, don't be surprised if this happens again. Oh, no, this can't happen in America. A lot of people told me that.
Right.
I said, oh, you'll be surprised. History repeats itself.
Right.
It does.
I see in the
And if you don't watch, if you don't watch, all of us, it can happen very easily. People are swayed one way or the other.
I think there's a lot of Jewish people that didn't believe that until October 7th, to be honest with you. Not that we're going to go into that. I did want to mention that Brad Washabaugh, if I pronounce your name incorrectly, I'm so sorry. He said, I don't understand the hatred against Jewish people. Why? I'd love to have the answer to that. But it's the old, like I said in the beginning of my presentation, it's the oldest hatred in the world. It's existed for thousands of years. I can't explain it.
I tell you the truth, Tom, I tell you the truth. When I came to America and I was drafted and I was stationed in the South first, is he on?
Yes. Oh, I'm listening.
Yes, we're
I'm
here.
hanging on every word.
And and I went in the South and I seen what's happening here. Blacks, one toilet, the other for mine. I said, this is Germany. What am I coming here for? Yeah. I really meant it. I said, this is terrible. That's awful. We all put on this earth to get along.
Yeah.
So why can't we?
Yeah.
Great question.
Wonderful question.
That's it.
Wonderful question.
I think a lot about these things, It
Oh,
goes into my mind. It's sometimes during the night I can't sleep. Things come up.
Yeah.
But what can you do?
Well, Kurt, you've seen so much. You've seen the darkest part of humanity. You've seen the absolute worst of humanity. And I'm also sure that you've seen the best in humanity. You've seen people sacrifice themselves for others.
Right? That's right. True.
And so I mean, you carry this burden, which I think is one of the reasons why we're so in awe being in your presence here in your company, that you've seen the worst and the best that human beings can be.
Right.
And most of us have not. Most of us have not.
You're
And so-
right. You're right. And I hope you don't go through what we went through. Or
Yes.
anybody. I
Right.
don't wish it on anybody because it's horrible. It's just horrible. But my wife and I went through this, and then people went through even worse than we did. Even worse in the camps.
Yeah, I'm really lucky, Todd, because my parents shared with me. And I think often about the thousands or millions of stories that either can never be told because they didn't make it or because they could just never speak about it. So I'm extremely fortunate that my parents shared.
Yes, that's exactly it. The stories that can't be shared. It's rare a person like your father and mother who are able to share their stories that are so traumatic, so kind of hard. It's hard to get across what you experienced. So I've heard a lot of veterans say, nobody will ever understand. Why should I even try? And your parents could have said that, but instead they decided to share their story with you and then you with us. And we're very grateful for that, Debbie and Kurt and Edith. Thank you for spending just
Thank
this
you.
hour with us. And again, I do want to emphasize that if anybody would like Debbie to speak to her group, please do. And if you
Todd,
don't
one
get your
second.
email,
I
Here's
did
my
put
wife.
Oh,
my,
here.
oh yeah, my
Here's
mom
my
just
wife.
wants to say hi before we sign off.
we want to say hi, Edith.
Edith.
Hi, Mommy.
Hello.
Thank you for
Hello.
Okay,
Hello.
Really?
sharing your story with us, Edith.
Welcome. We were glad to do it.
Oh,
Thanks,
Very
Mommy.
important.
Well,
Yeah.
just Mom and Dad, just so you know, our time is up because every hour is a different veteran. So you're more than welcome to listen in and put yourself on mute. I just had to say that, Todd.
God bless you both, Kurt and
Okay.
Edith and Debbie. Thank you so much for giving us such a
very nice
wonderful
Thank
talking
you.
with you.
Thank
and
you
inspiring
also.
time.
Thank you for listening.
Take
Take
care.
care. Oh
Yeah.
boy. Well, this
Have a
is
good
what
Veterans Day.
happy Veterans Day to you. Absolutely. This is what the Veterans Breakfast Club does is we, share stories, and sometimes they're difficult ones, sometimes